Broadcasting live 4 days a week worldwide.
From the sunny beaches of Southern California,
This is ExtremeHealthRadio.com.
Hi, this is Lisa Callison with DiscoveryScreening.com, where we're saving breasts and saving lives with advanced medical thermal imaging. And you are listening to two of the most phenomenal beings on the planet, my new favorite breast friends, Justin and Kate, on Extreme Health Radio. Enjoy the show. It's going to make a huge difference in your lives.
Well, guys, we officially set the record today for being the most late we've ever been for a radio show. 18 minutes late. That's crazy.
but you know what? We're rolling with it.
We're rolling with it. This is actually a bonus show anyway, because we only do shows 1 day a week. So this is a bonus show. We're really excited. This is going to be a lot of fun. We're having such a fun conversation before we came into the studio. So much fun. So we're with Andrea James from justiceashealing.com, and she wrote
.org.
.org. And she wrote a book, a really interesting book called Upper Bunkies Unite. And this is sort of a little bit of a different show. She's the co-founder of the advocacy organization Families for Justice and as Healing, and the creator of Career Roadmap for Girls. And where are those located? Where are they based out of?
We're based out of Boston,
Based out of
Massachusetts.
Boston. Okay. Mm-hmm. And you were saying before the show that you've been doing this for many, many years,
Very
right?
long time.
Well, I've been working within the area of criminal justice reform and criminal justice in general for pretty much all of my adult life, and even going back to starting in college. And was I'm a former criminal defense lawyer and real estate lawyer, and mostly primarily focused my career on criminal defense work and working on raising the level of awareness within people about the need for us to take a real look at our criminal justice system in the United States and figure out some better ways that we can help people to heal and advance their lives for the betterment of all of us.
Right.
And that also are more cost effective.
So you were saying that you learned a lot when you went in, because you were practicing a lawyer, and then...
can you tell a little bit about your story to everyone, if you don't mind? Just
Sure. No,
a nutshell?
Not at all. So I was a practicing lawyer in my city of Boston, Massachusetts. Loved it. Did primarily criminal defense work, as I said. And I also was a real estate conveyance lawyer. And I served a 2-year federal prison sentence for in relation to my real estate conveyance practice. And I can start there by saying that just that experience alone was completely horrific for me. And it was a result of me making poor choices, trying to be helpful, being far too rebellious in trying to do that. Our community in Roxbury, Massachusetts, was one of the communities most hardest hit during with foreclosures.
With this whole 2008 thing.
With the whole 2008 thing. And in a city like Boston, where families are losing their homes to foreclosure, it devastates an entire community. I described to you earlier that my children, for instance, are the 4th generation to live in our home in Roxbury, Massachusetts. And many of the communities in and around Boston are like that. Families who have been there for many generations. And so to lose a home is more than just, a year ago I purchased a house and I was, couldn't really afford it. These are families that have been in the communities for generations, who came over to the country from the Caribbean, from Ireland, from from Italy, from a number of different places, and settled in Boston, and then raised for generations their families.
And now they lose their home.
Out of a real estate predatory lending frenzy that swept through this country and was devastating to working class and middle class families.
Right.
And really it was a problem of taking advantage of predominantly misinformed or undereducated consumers and having these mortgage products that in themselves were criminal in the sense that they were just such bad products. It's like going into a store and purchasing any kind of other thing that you would purchase. People were purchasing mortgages that same way.
Yeah.
And the mortgages just were incredibly bad products.
Yeah.
People wanted to have extra money to do things, and housing prices were artificially inflated. There were all sorts of things going on during that real estate boom period that just could never sustain itself. And so in making some poor choices, in helping some families through some of that and turning it into a much too long bad practice, I eventually self-reported my offense. My offense was wire fraud that I served a 2-year sentence for in the federal prison for women in Danbury, Connecticut. And it was really a result of doing some stuff to help that really spiraled out of control.
So you were helping some people, and then it was constituted as wire fraud?
Well, yes, it was, because when the bottom line is I was a lawyer, okay, and I had a fiscal responsibility. I had a fiduciary responsibility to my clients. Unlike my criminal defense practice, my clients were banks. They were mortgage lenders.
I see.
I probably closed a huge percentage of mortgages that were coming into the Black community in Boston. And it was an extraordinarily lucrative area of law to practice in at the time.
I imagine.
But soon after, a little bit of time of doing this, these same families started to come back into my office, which was right in the heart of the community I also grew up in. And they were coming back with these very difficult stories of struggle, of trying to hang on to their homes and realizing far too late what they had entered into contractually with these great offers at the time.
Yeah.
But things like, no doc loans and adjustable rate mortgages and these things that just, when it flipped over, people just couldn't sustain.
Yeah, as soon as the mortgage rate's going up, they can't afford some incredibly high percentage mortgage rate.
And the homes were underwater even before people knew what that term meant, because they had borrowed against their homes, and they were aggressively targeted with these mortgages.
And so now people are doing those reverse mortgages now to try to. Is that
a reverse mortgage is more in relation to an older person who is wanting to take out a mortgage, for instance, so that they can provide for themselves and stay at home and not maybe go into a nursing home or something that would allow them to stay in their home.
Is there anything nefarious about that?
Well, I certainly cannot. I don't practice law anymore.
Yeah.
I was disbarred, and I don't give legal advice in any fashion or form. All I can really say is that it is a form of a mortgage, a reverse mortgage, and you should do your due diligence.
Yeah.
And if there's anything that you don't understand, you should sit down with somebody and understand what all the terms are.
Right.
And it's not so bad. It's not so much that a reverse mortgage is so much of a bad thing. You just want to know what's in the mix of all of
what's in the contract.
What's in the contract?
Yeah.
What are the terms? What does it actually mean? That's what's most important.
So when you were in for 2 years,
And what year was this?
Yeah, what
Because I
year
just
was-
started your book.
I was sentenced in November of 2009, and I went in on the first week in January 2010.
okay,
And, my experience, I always like to say this. This is the work that I do now is incredibly important to me. But I want to always preface this with my experience as an incarcerated woman was different than 90% of the women that I was incarcerated with, really. And I was a lawyer. I actually I self-reported my offense, so I started the ball rolling on.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't live with yourself that way, or
Well, you know what? It was important to correct something that was a mistake. And I didn't want anybody else to be harmed. I had a fabulous office of amazing people that had been with me over the years. They were phenomenal people. They had nothing to do with my decisions of what got me in trouble.
so you didn't want them to be harmed.
And it really was, I mean, when the crash happened, it was unsustainable. You just couldn't, I just couldn't sustain covering up my mistake. And it's one of the things that I like to talk about, because we're so afraid of making mistakes, and we're so afraid of keeping up this image. And often it's those things that get us in trouble in the first place. It's not dealing with those kind of fears emotionally and psychologically, and a lot of the stuff that some of your guests have talked about that, bring us to these places where we make poorer choices because we're thinking
out of fear.
We're thinking out of fear.
Yeah.
So I went and walked into this prison after having been a criminal defense lawyer and really working. I worked as a young person in college from the start with very gang and gun involved young boys and men in Boston. So I had this real history of doing social justice work.
Yeah.
And as a criminal defense lawyer, I saw the parade of predominantly, black men and women through the court system in Massachusetts and doing the work that I did. And I really didn't think there was much that anybody could tell me about the fact that we do have a broken criminal justice system.
It was sort of more mental in your
yeah.
Like you knew this stuff, but you never really experienced it.
I grew up in a urban community. I was very aware of it. I was very fortunate. I grew up in a wonderful, upper middle class black family we had all of the advantages of a great education and everything else. I didn't grow up dealing with necessarily these issues personally. From a family perspective. My upbringing was phenomenal. It was just amazing, and was very lucky to have the adults in my life who were just amazing people. But they were all civil rights, social justice folks, that did each of their respective, whether it was a doctor or a lawyer, they continue to do, or a professor, which my mom was a college professor, their jobs from seeking social justice.
Okay.
Which makes growing up with them a very interesting experience.
Yeah,
but to walk into that prison as an incarcerated woman into Danbury, Connecticut. So my experience was very different. I went to court twice. I went to hear the charges against me. I didn't have handcuffs on me ever in my life until I went into the prison.
Oh, strange.
So if you compare that though to most of the women that were in Danbury with me, those women weren't so fortunate, and too often they were arrested. It was some sort of drug-related episode, a raid or something that's happened, and literally the last time they saw their children was maybe 5, 6, 7, or 8 years ago. And that, to me, when I realized the extent of that, when I realized what was really going on, and I was just in one prison. We've got countless prisons full of women all over the country. And when you get into the federal level, women are doing so much more time, you know.
And what are they getting as far as federal level? What kinds of crimes are?
Yeah, what
women?
takes you to a federal level? I was curious.
Well, money, obviously. My infraction was against the banks that I was a lawyer.
So was yours
for.
a federal prison, federal offense?
Yes. So
yours was.
So yes, it was a federal offense because it involved banks and their money.
Yeah.
And so. Interestingly enough, which is one of the questions I always have, is why are the feds in the drug business? Why are the feds? Why is that not something that is only overseen by the states?
Right.
Why would feds be in the business of criminal justice? A sentencing around drugs
because they need more money.
Well, it makes you wonder, why. And then when we look at the sentences, the drug sentences that came out of the war on drugs, that start at 10 years, right? Like so many people in the federal system it's just like, oh, I'm doing 10, So
and what kinds of things, like for marijuana, or what kinds of things?
Oh, marijuana. One of our oldest members who just came home. I'll give you an example because people really don't believe that this is true. People do not believe this. Sandra Saunders, who was like a mother to us all, this older Italian woman. She's, I believe, 71 years old now. She's been home for about a year now. She and her son received federal sentences. Okay, so she did 10 years.
And how old is she now?
71.
Yep, she did 10 years. And I met her at Danbury, a phenomenal woman, and we're fighting now to get her son, Anthony Saunders, sentence commuted. Anthony was a first-time nonviolent offender who is serving a 25-year sentence for selling marijuana. So the reality of this is that people really don't understand that this is happening. People say, oh, there are no people that are, if you're in the federal system, you're this hardened criminal and you've done this really bad thing.
Right.
Well, I don't know many people still today who would, agree with a 25-year sentence.
Non-violent. First offense.
First time. Anthony never had a parking ticket before he went to prison. And
so is he serving now?
He's in prison right now, and now there's a initiative going on through the Justice Department. The Obama administration now has something called the Clemency Project 2014, when President Obama has said that his administration will commute the sentences of people who fit into a particular criteria.
Well, his administration will commute
commute means to end.
To end, okay.
So they will allow the sentence to come to an end and allow the people to come out, and people are applying for it now. And there are law firms across the country that have volunteered to help process all of these applications that are coming out of the federal prison system. But the criteria are for people like Anthony, and you had to have already served 10 years, so you got skin in the game. Right. So.
Oh my gosh. Before you even qualify to be looked at for that.
Before you even qualify. So we've been pushing back against that part a little bit, because up until that time, anybody could apply for commutation. Nobody hardly ever got it, but now more people will. But if you fit into that criteria, you haven't been in trouble since you've been in there, you don't have any identifiable gang affiliation. I mean, there's all of this, and many people, fortunately, though, still fit. A lot of our women that are members of our organization are shy maybe 2 or 3 years of the 10-year. So we're still pushing to try and get their applications some recognition.
So this is the work you do?
This is the work that I do.
Thank God, because, I mean, if people like you weren't out there, I mean, these people are in prison and they have no ability to really represent themselves or have anything done on their behalf. I mean, this is crazy.
And it's just wrong. We're going to look back on this period of mass incarceration in this country like we look at slavery. Okay.
Oh, for sure.
We're going to come to a point, and it might take us, obviously it's going to take us a lot longer. We're not all there yet, but eventually we will come around to understanding that this is just morally wrong. And spiritually it's wrong. And we've got to work and help, from a place of love. It's very easy to get very angry. And trust me, with a lot of the people that we speak to who don't really understand this, we try and, really help to humanize our members and to help people to remember. We advocate on behalf of women unapologetically, and helping people to understand that when you take a woman and put her in prison, and if she's a mom in particular, and you separate her from her children, the consequences, the collateral consequences of that are so huge. And really helping people to understand that prison is such a dehumanizing environment. I had a family, I had a husband, my children and my parents and my aunts and uncles. I had this huge support system while I was incarcerated. And it took me almost a year to get off of my couch once I came home. It's an incredibly exhausting experience. If you don't have that network of support,
a lot of
which
people,
most don't,
which most do not, you come out and you have been stripped of entirely everything. You have no money. You have a felony conviction which precludes you from working in most situations. Most states preclude you from getting housing assistance or public housing or affordable housing because you have a felony conviction. So all of these things, you can't get a student loan. All of the things that you can't
or even
get,
a loan for a car or something simple like that.
Something simple like that. I mean, you can't even move into an apartment because they do background checks on people now.
Right.
So what we've done is we've continued this we've created this really almost permanent underclass, and then we've made it impossible for them to begin to heal and advance their lives and to get back up and to start moving again, because they're still shackled, in really difficult ways.
So Andrea, when you went in, because I'm like I said, I took this book on the last 4 days on a retreat, and I barely got to any of it because I was stuck in art therapy classes. But
nice.
It was great. But I'm so excited. But I've read it and looked in a little bit of it. But when you went in, did you have? Doesn't sound like you really had this plan of coming out with this plan of exposing this to the world. I mean, you really had to be empathetic, live this. Sounds like when you were in there, from what I've read so far, it really changed you so much so that, I mean, when you came out though and you were laying on that couch for a year, did you know what it was that you had to put it into the world, but you still were just so exhausted you needed that?
I was exhausted, really, because just the whole sensory deprivation of being in a prison, that whole environment is just so incredibly destructive. But, emotionally, psychologically, and I was just exhausted. I slept, day in and day out. But it transformed my life, even though I knew a lot about the system, and I had countless, personal friends who I grew up in a very urban community in Boston. And, you don't grow up in a community like that and not know many families that have been impacted by incarceration.
Right.
And so I knew that personally. But I have to tell you, to walk into that prison, and there was this heaviness in the air that it was really an really odd experience. And, as a lawyer, I had gone into many prisons before to meet with my clients, and I would feel kind of this heaviness as well. And I never really put my finger on it until I lived in that prison with all of these women who had been separated from their children. And really, had older children, and then at 45, I had my husband and I had our baby boy.
You had a 6-month-old, right, at the time?
And so he was 6 months old when I went into prison. So, to have that experience of leaving I was able to drive myself to the prison.
I couldn't believe that. Your whole family's in the car.
My whole family's in the
willingly...
car. My experience was very different. Like I said, I was given the opportunity to pick which day I was going to go to prison, to show up. I wanted to go sooner than later. The judge was willing to give me all the time I needed.
Did they give you any leniency because of you voluntarily went in? Was there any sort of, could it have been longer?
Oh yes. And the U.S. attorney was actually, which is the other thing. I mean, there's so much information, it could be overwhelming, and I don't want to overwhelm your listeners, but the federal system sentences you, there's either two ways. You're either sentenced under a mandatory minimum sentence, or you're sentenced under the federal guidelines.
Okay.
And the federal guidelines is really just a book. You open the book up, and it's a grid, and you go down and over, and you see how much time you should be doing based on that offense. And so, I was very fortunate. I received more than 50% below the guideline sentence. The judge said he didn't want to send me it at all, but he had to. There had to be some, because of the guidelines, I had to go to prison. It was standing room only in the courtroom when I was sentenced. The community really came out in support of me. And I had been in my community for many, many years doing social justice work. And I was very fortunate to have that support from the families and the people of my community. And I had also self-reported my offense. Mm-hmm. I had voluntarily surrendered my license to practice law. I mean, all of these things helped, certainly. And instead of the 63 months that the U.S. attorney was asking for, I received a 24-month sentence. And like I said, I just didn't think there was anything more that somebody could tell me about how broken the system was until I lived in this prison with these women. And the heaviness that you begin to identify almost immediately is this separation from their children. And which
would be completely different for a men's prison. They wouldn't.
Well, 80% of the primary caretakers of when you look at the population of incarcerated people, okay, 80% of that population who were the primary caretakers of their children were women. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it impacts women. It's almost like a double sentence that you're giving to a woman who's a mother, and I mean, women had all kinds of jobs in the prison, mopping floors and cleaning toilets and you name it, whatever. Mm-hmm. Or we'd be sitting in the chow hall during a mealtime, and a woman would just fall out, and we would all know what that is. She would just, would be overwhelmed with sadness. And the heaviness in these women from, you almost put your family completely out of your mind to get through your time.
You have
You have to. Because to live every day thinking of and worrying about your children.
What they're doing.
And keep in mind, most of these women are coming from communities all across the country. So I was in Connecticut and Danbury, and we had women from Compton and Texas and Houston. And
oh, really?
So
why is that?
The federal system is the federal system. So the federal prison system will send you anywhere they need a bed filled. And there are certain policies that aren't adhered to, but there are policies that say you're supposed to be kept within 500 miles of your 500 miles, right?
500. Well, I read that your husband, God bless him, drove 6 miles. Or 6 hours.
6 hours every visit.
Every weekend. Right?
And I would beg him sometimes in a blizzard, for instance, don't come. And he came every single visit. So, but there were times when we were just one of a few women in the visiting room with a visit. And visits are very different for women than they are for men who are incarcerated, because women are the caretakers.
Right.
So when you lock a woman up, who's usually the one who would be running around and taking care of everybody else, it has an immediate impact on families. And I have to say too, with the war on drugs and the sentencing around the war on drugs, what it did is it created generations of families and the aggressive prosecutorial culture that grew even more out of this kind of drug war frenzy.
Because now they're seeking out people. They're doing raids and they're doing these schemes where they're, prostitution. They're
catching people, setting people up.
Putting fake cops out there.
So it's bigger than the drug war. Now it's, like
right.
you said, it's prostitution. It's just morphed into this thing. But understand, we were talking about it earlier that, we have about 40 million people in the country that use drugs, that make the choice to use drugs. And so the majority of those people aren't poor black people. Right? So, but if you look in state by state by state and in the federal system, the disproportionate numbers are those numbers of African Americans that are incarcerated for pretty much anything, but particularly around drug offenses. Yet that comes from the targeting and the handling by law enforcement of targeting certain communities.
Right.
So, for instance, as a child, I went to a very prestigious school, Milton Academy. Now, and this is a disclaimer, I'll just say, across the board, all private schools on that level there are drugs all over the campus, right? And so, obviously, I went to college and I went to law school, and there's drugs in all these places also. Yeah. So, if you were to, and all of the communities that those kids come from, there are drugs all throughout. So, if you targeted any other places, you would have those same incidents and even higher of drug arrests if you were looking for drugs in those particular places. Yeah. So what we argue is that, listen, we have to legalize, first of all, we have to legalize drugs. It's a war against plants, and that's outrageous. And we have to start to understand why people are using drugs. Why do we have this insatiable demand for drugs in this country, and really get to the core of the human factor of all of this? Why are people choosing?
Right.
But do you think it goes too deep for the average person, or maybe even just for the people that are in politics and in government? Do you think it goes too deep for them to because you really get to the core issues, and it's pretty heavy stuff. It's stuff that's so interwoven within our culture and the fabric of how we've set up our politics. It would almost cause a whole restructuring of our political system and everything else. And it's almost as if it's just easier to put people in prison because they could keep kicking the can down the road so that they can make their money. And it's just easier to do that. And I'm with you. I think in I'm not sure how long, but in 100 years, 200 years, we're going to look back at this time and just be completely blown away that I cannot believe that this happened back then. Back when they had the internet, back when it was 2015 and they had the internet and all knowledge
was rampant,
was available, yet we still did these things. And I think my contention is that there's something to do with this previous generation of people that are still in political power, these senators who can keep working until they're 90 years old. It's that mindset from 40, 50 years ago that they still have. And I think that, we were talking about it the other day, that a president that's 40 years from now, because we're talking about how amazing it is that any kid that's, 10 years old or more, or 20 years old now, will not have been able to, basically the internet was around for his entire life. For us, it's like the last 10 or 15 years it came into our life, but it's amazing to think that there's going to be a president one day who's not going to know what it's like to live in a world where there was no internet. And I think that maybe as we start getting farther along in time, we're going to look back and say, what in the hell were we doing? It's insane.
It is insane, and you're right. It's not. It's about control. And so essentially what we've allowed to happen in this country is that we've criminalized poverty, we've criminalized addiction, and we're, increasingly criminalizing what made this country great, immigration, right? So, and that's become kind of the new, as we begin to kind of break down very very incrementally, in tiny ways. We're starting to pull people out of prisons more for, the drug crimes and so forth, and really saying, you know what, this hasn't worked too well. We're spending gobs of money. But they're finding ways to keep that incarceration machine in place now by putting the emphasis on immigration.
How do you mean they're they're seeking out?
Yeah, so a lot of the prison beds are remaining full now, and the prison building is continuing, but the focus has shifted to issues of immigration now, and putting people who are coming into the country into those prisons, and finding people who are here, who they say are here illegally, to put into those prison beds. So. While we're working on kind of restructuring things from a criminal justice perspective, they're finding ways to keep that system of incarceration, of using prisons as a form of control, and I would imagine also as a form of, the military-industrial complex has to be supported in some way. And
they have to stay in existence.
If you look at a lot of the folks that come out of serving in our country's military, a lot of the people who staff prisons are former military people.
Okay.
So
sounded like it from reading some of your book. I'm like, oh my gosh.
So it's the military industrial complex that's kind of contributed to this as well, and sustaining. How do we sustain those people which we don't do the whole issue around veterans and the support that they don't get in this country is just criminal. It's horrific.
It should be a criminal offense.
It should be. Yeah. It should be. And so, but that helps to sustain some of the livelihood for people because they've put those jobs in that realm, of prison. So, what are the answers?
I think it's a slowly chipping away like what you're doing because, as we all know, freedom is not given, it's taken. And any semblance of, if our government had its way, women wouldn't be voting. Black people wouldn't be doing anything other than being slaves. I mean, if things were just to continue on as they were. So all these things are things that are taken by force from protesting and nonviolent.
And it's the only thing that makes it. So the people, when you talk about like this power, and so overwhelming and what you feel like we're up against. But this is why it's so important to use your voice and to have platforms created for people to talk about these things that people just normally aren't hearing about. The very human, the very realness, the texture of what we're talking about, the people, the lives, the communities that are impacted by this. Because once you understand that and you kind of dispel the fear, and that you even begin as somebody who would say, well, this doesn't really impact me, and yes, I am afraid. I'm afraid, and that's good. That's good. That's a first start.
Yeah.
To even be able to say, I am afraid. But I just felt, to get back, and I'm sorry, I digress, Kate.
No,
to get back
gosh.
to answering your question, I felt that I had this responsibility to use my voice. One, I was able to, and I had a reach to places that most people that were coming out of that experience didn't have. I had the ability to articulate things. I had the ability to fill that missing seat at the table. In most places that I am working in, I am the only formerly incarcerated person at the table.
So you're the only one that could speak from personal experience about what's really going on.
Right. And demand to be taken seriously and to have our voices, to create more of those seats at the table, because the answer is you can't leave out the most impacted who have, some really great solutions of how we could turn this stuff around. Yeah. But the bottom line is, are the constituents going to begin to understand, how there is a real need for change? Because it doesn't matter if the politicians or the politics is not supported by the people, it's not going to happen. So we have to use our voice as much as we can to get into those communities, to get into those places. And that's why we advocate on behalf of women, but we do outreach to women. because women have been the catalyst behind every great change that's happened anywhere. And women, many women understand, as formerly incarcerated women, when we have a conversation about what it's like to separate a mother from her child. And they have been very open, even some very conservative groups of women, that really resonates with them.
Because they understand. And
it helps them to really kind of take a pause just long enough to really begin to understand and to look at the profiles of most of the women that are in our country's prisons and start to understand that these women don't need to be there and the destruction it causes their communities and their families.
Do you think there's any good, in the future, in the near future, do you see things changing in terms of these drug laws? Are there? I mean, I know Colorado, Washington are starting to legalize marijuana, which thank God they're doing that.
Right.
And I think the rest of the states in the union are looking at those states as being sort of the guinea pigs. But then they look at Colorado, they're saying, wow, they've made $800 million in 1 year from taxing marijuana when crime is down, all these things are down. And I think other states are going to start jumping on the bandwagon. But do you think that the authorities are going to start not being as vindictive and seeking out criminals and doing raids and trying to get people in prison for drugs? Do you think? Is that ever going to happen? Do you think?
Wow. It's a good question. I mean, it's a good question. I think what we can do is to continue to educate people. There are places like Portugal who have done this amazing decriminalization of drugs. Decriminalization is different than legalization. Legalization just legalizes drugs. Right. Decriminalization decriminalizes them up to a certain quantity, for instance. So it still sustains the ability to prosecute large quantities of drugs.
But then there's regulation and all kinds of stuff.
There's regulations. I mean, there's all kinds of things. But the real important thing about Portugal's model is that it demonstrates that by decriminalizing and actually using it as, so for instance, heroin to be used as a way to help people manage their addiction, and not to just say, you know what? The only answer we have for you if you have the illness of addiction, and your drug is heroin, is we're going to lock you up. And when you look at countries like Portugal that have really decriminalized drugs and have poured so much of that money into all of the social justice, the people issues that often are the catalyst for people
seeking drugs out.
Yeah. When we see what happens when we make those kinds of investments, which is why we started our organization in the prison yard in Danbury, and we named it Families for Justice as Healing, because we wanted people to begin to think about justice needs to come from a place of healing, not from just this continuous place of punishment. For when we think of prison, we think of the worst monster, meanest person that you can think of. The fact of the matter is that, hurt people hurt people. Right. And the more that we continue to sustain poverty and hunger. I was recently with this phenomenal organization called Bread for the World that does national and international work to end hunger. And they heard us. And they now are helping to get that message out that, incarceration of mothers leads to hunger in children, right? And that cycle continues and repeats itself. So it impacts so much of a person's ability to be whole, right, and to be healthy. And health isn't just about, it is everything about the food that we eat and the air that we breathe, but there's a lot more to that infinite being in us. Yeah. And how do we do the things that help us get back to that? Because even the worst person that you can imagine in all of your wildest dreams, who might be sitting in a prison somewhere for doing some really bad thing to another person, that infinite being is in that person still too. Right?
Yeah.
And as long as we all recognize that and understand that, there's still hope for us all.
Yeah.
But how do we begin to create a system that really allows us to help people to begin to heal?
That's a good thing. There's a... Oh, do you go?
No, go ahead.
No. There's just a really, really interesting quote in the Bible that says, Paul says, "There but for the grace of God go I." And it's interesting to think about, since we're all human, if I were living in someone else's body, I would do what they did. We think, no, I wouldn't do what that guy did. He killed someone or whatever. But if you take the approach that we're all human and have the same sort of soul and essence of being, this infinite being, if we were living in someone else's life and everything, we just went through life exactly the same way they did, most likely we would probably do the same things that they did. Most likely.
Well, yeah.
And
I always say, when we came, back into this human experience, I tell a lot of the women when I go into the prisons to speak, I remind the women that, you have to shift how you're looking at your life, right? And you have to understand that you're probably one of the most phenomenal beings on the planet because you're contributing to this shift that's happening throughout the universe, right? And your life experience is part of that shift.
Yeah.
Now, how are we going to get that inner toolbox working so that we can start to recognize that?
Yeah.
But when you start to talk to people about that, it kind of lights up something because it's in us, right? It lights up something that connects with that infinite being part of us all, right? And all it takes is kind of planting those seeds. And so I say, don't look at yourself as, I'm a complete failure. I'm incarcerated. I'm locked up,
Yeah, shameful.
Shameful.
Yeah.
Start to look at, wow, I created this experience from my infinite being self to evolve me and the rest of our human race.
Right.
So I'm really the good guy here.
Yeah, totally.
But if you think about it that way, it begins to help people to shift just away from that really bad negative space that we've kind of labeled everybody with.
Right.
Really coming from our own fear.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, and when you see it as a soul shift, I mean, do those women's eyes spark? Do a lot of them get it? I mean, do you plant the seed where they're like, their eyes start to have their aha moment in there? Or is it mostly like you planted a seed, you walked away, and then you might get an email 10 years later from somebody?
Right.
Yeah.
It's the same for all of us, right? There's certain things that you hear that, it's just little drips, still in my every single day. It was like the first time that I heard Extreme Health radio. It was just like, wow, and I there were a couple of my favorite ones and but it just it creates a shift in you, right?
It's like a little spark that goes, wow, I didn't know that.
I didn't know that. And
didn't see it as
even
such.
things that I don't completely understand, sometimes it helps me to grow though, and it was you guys who really wanted us to begin to think, how can we do better at not just talking about the problem of mass incarceration? Yes, raising awareness. There are still a lot of people that don't know we are the most incarcerating country in the world. We have 5% of the world's population. We have 25% of the world's prison population.
Yeah, I heard that stat the other day. It blew my mind.
And when it comes to women, we incarcerate a third of the women who are incarcerated in the world, in this country. Okay?
A third in the world.
Yes. And so when you think about that, it's incredibly, it just blows your mind. So even people who may not have said, well, I've never really been impacted by any of this. I don't really, I think it's too bad. I just, I think, but I'm not really, I think if you're in prison, you probably deserve to be there. Yeah, right. We're just trying to help people to start thinking about, well, what else is possible? What if we took prison and took it off the table for a minute, right? And I know that's a huge leap for people, but 90% of the people that we could take it off the table for who are currently incarcerated don't need to be there. Right. They just don't need to be there. Now, it's not to say that, if you're hurting and harming somebody, there's something has to happen so that you can't continue to hurt and harm people.
There's a physical harm to somebody. That's a different story.
But even in that story, that there's still that infinite being in there, and you're certainly not going to bring that infinite being out in these horrific places that are prisons.
Yeah.
But that's the problem, though, is that people, I don't think people essentially, maybe more and more people are waking up, but they don't start out with that same sort of framework and mindset that we do, that they don't believe there's an infinite being in there. And so they think so-and-so committed some sort of crime and they need to pay for that. And that's all they think about. And so if you don't think that there is some inherent innate quality of someone that's amazing and great and good, then you're going to have this sort of closed-mindedness to anything we're talking about, saying, hey, well, they deserve it. They committed some crime and they deserve it. And maybe that's part of the work that you do, raising awareness and saying, hey, just try to look at it from a different perspective and see if a 25-year sentence for a first-time offender selling marijuana really makes any sense. Then you start saying, like, because a lot of people think, oh, well, if it's, it's a crime, so I don't care really what it is. If it's a crime, they need to pay. But what we're saying is, hey, let's redefine the word crime, and let's not just default to this government that is making up these words and attaching these labels to them and saying that they're always correct. Because as we said before, freedom is taken; it's never given. And so we can't just take. If you look at the political history of our country, all over the world, you're not going to find great things in terms of our
well, it's been a
history.
system of control. I mean, Michelle Alexander has a phenomenal book out called The New Jim Crow.
Oh, really?
And it's probably the premier book around criminal justice reform for people who really, it's shifted amongst people who in academia and in middle America and people who just never really quite understood what all of us who are way over here have been, clanging the jailhouse doors about for so long.
So what do you mean it's shifted for the other people?
Well, she wrote it. It's such a scholarly piece, but she gave the history of punishment, crime and punishment, the criminal justice system in this country. Okay. And it really helps people to see that connectivity from slavery to, all the penal laws to, after, Reconstruction. I mean, all of these things that just from different aspects in time continued the race-related oppression of people in this country through the use of the criminal justice system.
So it's an exacerbation. It just continues on in different little minor forms. Yeah. And people don't see that. But
people don't see that. So I know Ferguson has been in the news a lot lately. So when you talk about Ferguson, for instance, and you look at, the Justice Department has now just done an investigation that said, wow, you guys have really hammered this one tiny part of St. Louis in terms of fines and probation, parole, whatever the justice involved kind of shackle that they have placed on people. Yeah. That makes it virtually impossible for poor people who can't begin the fines to even begin with, who end up, serving, they'll send you to the county jail for 3 months or something because you can't pay your fine. And how that form of law enforcement control, how we've managed to make law enforcement in this country a tool to be used in this manner is something that we have to, it's another piece of that whole puzzle of how we have to wake people up and help them to see what the life experience is like for people just because of the color of their skin or the place where they live. And so that's very prevalent still in this country today.
Yeah, and putting yourself in someone else's position, because we think, like I said before, oh, if I were in his position, I'd act differently. But in reality, I don't think that's the case. And About 20 years ago, I read a book called The People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. And my goodness, that opened my eyes to history from another perspective that people don't want to talk about. Because as we all know, history is written by the winners of wars. And so anytime you have an event that takes place, there's all kinds of different angles and different ideologies and different accounts of what's really going on. And so what we're given in our culture is just you know, the winners of wars. And so he brought to light a whole new way and paradigm of looking at our American history. And it's just, this is something that we're talking about before the show, but I just find it fascinating that we even still call people black and white. Because that makes, that to me, it seems like it's a label that was created by someone other than us. Because I've never met a black person. I've been to Africa. I've never met a black person that their skin is actually black. And I've never Kate, you're white, but your skin is not white.
Right.
So we're more similar than we are different. So if a black and white person, if there's someone that's actually black and someone that's actually white, they would look so insanely different. And we would be shocked at the differences of them. But I'm some color of a brown. Kate's a little lighter brown. You're a little darker brown, but you're not black and I'm not white. And so I think when we create these labels, we create this, even with the language structure that we have, we create this divisiveness, saying, "Hey, I'm different than you because I'm white, but I'm not really white."
And it's right. And so it within the criminal justice system, it really, that's where you really see this you know, showing itself in terms of the labeling.
Yeah.
You know, the labeling of a felon, the words inmate, for instance. So there's this movement that's sweeping the country now within our world of criminal justice reform that we're putting that word to rest. So
Inmate.
Why is that?
Because inmate is a word that we're called. We become that. That's our name when we go to prison. You're not, you kind of lose your individual identity and you're an inmate. And it's disparaging. It's completely, you know, dehumanizing and humiliating.
It
and
levels you.
Yeah.
It sure does. And so,
do they refer to you by number as well?
Yep. And you're assigned a prison number. And so, you would probably at most use your last name with your prison number, but you're referred to, the PA goes off constantly throughout the day, inmate so-and-so, report to this, and inmate, and it is completely, I mean, it just, that whole experience just completely just breaks you down.
Why?
So,
there's got to be a reason for them using that term, right?
well, right. So what it does is that you recognize people who might be in the prison for a different capacity, such as the church, the chaplain or something, or there was this great Catholic priest, Daniel Barringer, who wrote a book with Thich Nhat Hanh, a Buddhist monk, and it's called The Raft is Not the Shore. But, you know, in that book, they both talk about the fact that and he was incarcerated himself by the church for his
incarcerated
rebelliousness.
By the church?
Yes. So,
how does that happen?
So I don't know. It's crazy.
System?
But he was a staunch advocate for helping us to recognize how labels really help and allow for the control of other people. And so he said the chaplain, which I noticed, I wrote a little blurb about that in my book, that the chaplain would call us inmates as well. And Daniel Barringer pointed out how horrible, how horrific that is, that even a chaplain would not recognize how dehumanizing that is, and use a term such as inmate. And what it allows to happen is that this same person that you were, literally, I had this experience before I surrendered into Danbury. I went to get a cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee, and I'm in the parking lot with the woman who I encountered when they were checking me into the prison, and she searched
you, right?
She was in her prison uniform.
Whoa!
And so the difference, within a 30-minute time span from this Dunkin' Donuts up the street from the prison to standing stripped completely naked, right, in my first strip search, by this woman who just 30 minutes ago I was standing in a Dunkin' Donuts with, and that breakdown of spiritual connection between people that existed still in that Dunkin' Donuts,
And
even though I didn't.
Right.
How she looked at me differently, how I had value, how, there was still something that she could, that would resonate with her, that, I'm not an inmate.
Mm-hmm.
And once you enter into that prison and you
become some label that they give you.
And it affects you emotionally. I mean, never mind that whole power trip that people that work in prisons do.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, we talk a lot about this on the show, is energetic health and emotions and spirituality and things. And I think that person, a little bit of her soul died, or there's some sort of energetic scarring that happened as a result of that, because she knows, and these people know, that we're all human, and they don't want to treat people like that, but they almost just do it consciously because they look at these people through the eyes of labels, and they say, this guy's a hardened killer, whatever. Right. And I think that they're deep down, they know what they're doing is not right, and I think that there's something with their physical health that's going to manifest years later as a result of this energy that they're putting out and stuffing and suppressing, and this anger that they have. I think it's bad for them too, but
it's incredibly bad, and it reflects in, the rate. Look at the rates of alcoholism, drug abuse, and domestic violence among people who work in prisons. Mm-hmm. It's off the charts.
It wouldn't surprise me.
It's
really
off the charts. So all of this really is what's so exciting when you start thinking about and listening to a lot of the information that you provide on Extreme Health Radio, and just, really doing some real soul searching to figure out, we can talk about this issue all day long, but if we don't ever get to that place where we're shifting this kind of dialogue to the fear in people, and because it really just all comes down to that with everything, and it's the way that you keep your heart open in doing this work as well, because I really try and connect, not so much with the person's name and their title. I'm in Washington, D.C. all the time. I work with, speak with congressmen and legislators on the state level and all kinds of people across the board, and go into prisons. And the one thing that I always try and do is to connect from my heart space first. Because if you go into this doing it in any other way, there's some very mean people that believe very strongly in our drug laws, in our sentencing laws, in building more prisons. And it's very tough to do this work if you try and do it from any other space. Mm-hmm. And I really strongly believe, sometimes I'll just, say something compassionate and try and, push my energy or pull that person's energy towards me in terms of, raising those levels before I get into a conversation with them. And it's amazing how it shifts that energy. Not always, but there's still something there that you can feel when you come from that space of love. And we've made this pact that we are going to stay on that path of love. And it's very easy to just wave a hand and say, oh, you're a racist, you're evil, you're mean. Yeah. You just want to lock up, black men or something. Yeah. There's all kinds of ways to generalize this.
And you could get angry, and you could be doing the same sort of harm in the world that they're doing, just from the other.
And we're perpetuating this because it's what you focus on is what begins to repeat itself. So we said, we're going to talk about love, and we're going to talk about what are the things that we know, using some time to say, here's what it is, but helping people to understand that love of a mother and a child, the importance of nurturing that relationship, the importance of providing for the very basic human needs for people, shelter and food, and clothing and safety, and how that will begin to really shift us towards a much more safer, happier, community.
I agree.
I have a thought, Andrea, or a question rather, but how much do you think just naivete plays into all of this? Because like in California, I did hair for 16 years, just recently retired and doing this full time, but I would talk to people all day long where they'd say stuff like, oh, our California system is ridiculous. They're letting criminals out left and right. The laws are so willy-nilly now, they're too, and then it's out of fear, but they're fearful of all these, quote, crazy, lunatic, rapists and murderers being let go. I mean, it's so naive to me to think, okay, well, if they're letting people go, and if that's even true, because I don't know. I mean, I've heard a little bit, I've looked at a little bit, but who knows what people could be saying, what's really true and what's not. But I feel like it's just naive people, misinformed people, and they're acting out of a place of fear to protect themselves and their world, and they're just totally reacting out of fear, not love. So isn't a ton of it actually just based in, I mean, you're working with people though on, I get it, like higher levels who actually are in the systems and the law, and they get all that, but the general public, I don't think they have a clue.
Well, it's why we go out. I mean, I speak all across the country, and I speak to groups of just everyday people who just, like I said, have not been impacted directly by this. And it is out of just really having this image, okay, that's been really forced
seared
upon
into
us.
Your brain, right?
This fear politics, really, and that it's just been forced upon us for so long that if you were to think about the population of incarcerated people and actually look at what they're in prison for, it's not what you think.
Yeah.
It's your brother.
Yes.
It's the things that your uncle did.
Yes.
It's these are things that aren't necessarily harming other human beings. It's related to something that is, not harming other people. And we just have these really bad sentencing laws that will put a person in prison for a really long time. But if you get right down to the core, well, who is this person? Let me just open up this thing and take a look around, particularly with women.
But that's too hard to do for people. It's easier just to say, they're a criminal, and that's bad that they're out.
Right. Well, it's like I said, why we're going to look back on this some years from now, like we did on slavery, because all of those kind of paradigms come into play when people are saying these kinds of things kind of off the top of their head. But if they have the experience, there's as a criminal defense lawyer, I defended, poor people who I did work on pro bono for. And I also represented children of wealthy families who could afford to pay a really great criminal defense lawyer to defend their kid. And, that's when their shift happens. That's when it happens.
It only happens when it impacts them.
When it impacts them. And still, we find that there is still a value placed on the life of somebody more than somebody else.
Wow.
And that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
So
I have to ask you, when you're going around and talking to just average sort of folks that maybe, like you said, have never been affected by this, what's the current state of, I'm not sure if you say this in your talks, but when you talk about the legalization of drugs, what's the general sentiment? I'm so curious because in my mind, it's just like a hands down, of course, drugs should be legalized because these are just substances we're ingesting into our body. Now, if you want to punish someone who perhaps is driving while they're high, then maybe you can do something like that. But someone sitting in their house or apartment ingesting a drug, it's my contention that all food are just drugs anyway. But people don't think of it like that. So when you talk to people, what do people say when you say those kinds of statements? What's the general sentiment? Are they
people
freaked out?
Don't get it?
Yeah.
And of course that whole fear of, well, we're going to have crack sold on every corner store, and not thinking about what it will really do. Stigma kind of controls everything. Right. And so when we have something that's illegal like drugs and the stigma that goes along with anything in relation to drugs, we have a problem because we can't even get past that stigma to begin.
It starts when you're in kindergarten. At school, you hear you have all these marches against.
Just say no.
You're
just say no and dare and all these things that are just like, just don't say. Well, that's not the reality. Okay.
Yeah.
The reality is that if you want to stop a kid or to make a kid pause and think about whether or not he or she wants to start engaging in drug use, you need to have those you need to open up the conversation about that.
Yeah.
Right. So you need to begin early in recognizing and Dr. Gabor Mate is a phenomenal.
He's an amazing guy.
He's amazing. He wrote the Realm of the Hungry Ghost, a must read to understand addiction, the illness of addiction in this country, and to help us to really get a grasp on why the war on drugs was never intended to stop drugs. Because if it were, we'd be asking people why what's hurting that you're self-medicating?
Right. What's broken?
What's broken?
What's broken? Yeah.
You know, Carl Hart is another one, Hart. He wrote a phenomenal book. He's over at Columbia, and he grew up in what, you know, in our neighborhood of the hood, as we say, in Miami.
We call ours the hood here too.
And
what book did he write?
He wrote High Price.
High Price.
For two really great books that help us to understand addiction and why it is absolutely ridiculous to have made all drugs across the board just, you know, hands down illegal. Because the fact of the matter is, we've got millions and millions and goo-gubs of people, as we said before, that use drugs. But imagine if you don't have those pieces, which Dr. Gabor Mate and Carl Hart help us to understand, have to be in place for addiction, the illness of addiction, to come upon somebody.
Take hold, yeah.
We've got bazillions of people that have gone on with their lives, used drugs, partied, whatever, right? Whatever,
and
or
even gone
for
on
medicinal purposes, you know, even heroin for medicinal purposes,
Right.
and have done so in a healthy way, and not fallen off into this, you know,
killing spree or whatever it is.
Well, actually might turn around and change the world. I mean, there's all kinds of
things, but you know, when we just focus on that. So talking to people about it changes with every audience, really. I mean, some audiences you could just come out and say, we should think about this. Because until we do something that just kind of places a moratorium on these kind of drug policies that we have, it's not going to give us the space to really, begin to unpack this stuff. And find
so how do people go about, like, after you finish a talk, how do you encourage people to go from there if they want to get involved with this? Or like people like you and I that are aware and we care about this, what's the next step for everybody that you would recommend?
Yeah. Well, that's good that you're asking.
Sorry to put you on the spot, but I'm like, what do we do?
What do we do?
A lot of people feel this.
Steps, so.
Right. So, one of my best friend grew up, born and raised in Roxbury with me. She now travels all over the world. She does energy work. She's amazing. She lives in Rome when she's home now. And my best friend, we grew up little girls together. And, she made it very clear to me years ago. I was doing work on the streets with very gun and gang involved kids. And she came home one day and she said, I said, come on, we're going to go, and we used to pass out these know the law cards so the kids knew how to interact with the police and so forth.
Right.
And she said, I am not going out there. I am not going to do that. And I will do anything else, but don't ask me to go onto a street corner and do any work. So I learned a valuable lesson from that. There is something for everybody. There is something for everybody. So even though this is like, you know, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? And so, really it's just educating yourself as much as you can.
Reading some books,
you know, start with Upper Bunkies Unite. And, you know, contact organizations like ours who are doing the work, because in California, there's tons of organizations. I know CURB is extraordinarily, California's United for a Responsible Budget. If folks are in this part of the country, you know, that's a good place to start over there. And to just, you know, a new way of life. You know, Susan Burton, who's an amazing, phenomenal woman who's here in California, who was incarcerated herself and then came out and just hit the ground running because she realized women had nowhere to live. Right. So there are all kinds of ways, but you can just start by getting involved with just, programs that are doing the work, and then within whatever structure they have, finding out. The last thing I'll say is, you know, we need money. Quite honestly, we're a nonprofit. There's tons of other nonprofits. We do legislative and policy work. It's not the easiest thing to describe to people. But our work is vitally important. We ended the shackling of pregnant women during labor in Massachusetts. We got the anti-shackling bill passed.
What did that involve?
What does that mean?
Yeah, what is that? That's interesting.
Anti-shackling
Well, that
during
goes
labor?
to the horrific experience of being incarcerated. If a woman is incarcerated and goes into labor, many states in the country still require that she be shackled one limb to the bed, at least. Some have shackled two limbs to the bed. So if you imagine even just spiritually what that is like for this woman who's in labor, in active labor, and I have children, so I know what that is. And if you can imagine that you are now shackled, your ankle, maybe an arm, whatever, and you have corrections officers
all around you, while you are delivering, bringing this
that energy into
this new baby, this new spirit into the world.
So what is that going to be like?
And it happens, and so Massachusetts finally ended that practice this summer. It was signed into law. It's called the Anti-Shackling Bill. We're working on repealing mandatory minimums and helping with the Clemency Project 2014 on the federal level. We have another piece of legislation called the Primary Caretaker Bill, which would cause a court to pause its sentencing, and if the person fits certain criteria and they are the primary caretaker of a dependent child, a community, some other thing than sending this person to prison needs to take place. We have phenomenal models in South Africa and Australia that do that. But it comes back down to the people. Even if, we got that anti-shackling bill passed in Massachusetts after it lingered around for 10 years because and predominantly the women in Massachusetts got organized around that, when we started to do outreach to women in all kinds of communities, wealthy communities, poor communities, and told them what was going on. Women would just, are you kidding me?
My mouth dropped. I'm like, I never even heard of that.
And that's a very common practice. There are states all over the country that still require the shackling of women during labor. So the difference was that the constituent involvement, okay? And you might not fully understand everything, and you say, well, I just don't even know where to begin. Picking up a telephone, so few people do it. Picking up a telephone, if legislators got 10 calls in one day, the place would shut down, right? It would just shut down because people aren't engaged in doing the very easy political maneuvers that don't take a lot from you.
Right.
You can send an email. You can pick up the telephone and just say, listen, I'm your constituent, and you need to get on board with passing this bill.
Might take you 5 minutes.
Take you 5 minutes.
I think it's out of fear, though. People get scared. People feel stupid. They feel like they don't know enough to have their voice heard. Or
So we give people scripts. People can call us, and it's literally 3 lines. It's literally 3 lines. And once you do it, people really get involved.
I bet.
Once they take that step, they're like, yes, because they feel like so many women come to me and they're just really upset because they think about things, whatever it is, hunger, whatever it is, a lot of different social justice issues that they feel that they should have a voice in. They don't know where to begin or how to do it. And something as small as that is so empowering just to know that you actually made that phone call.
Yeah.
And it makes a huge difference. And, there's a lot of money that we spend on goo-gobs of stuff, of all kinds of stuff. We need to be supporting things like Extreme Health Radio and all of the wealth and the just the breadth of information that you guys are bringing, to the airwaves that we might not ever hear about. These are the kinds of things you cannot be afraid to say, well, I don't want to write a check to Families for Justice's Healing because I'm not so sure that I agree with everything that they're saying.
Right.
But if something is resonating with you, that there's some good in this work, we need help to do this. And none of us are paid. yet. I sell the book, which keeps us on the road, and we have some great individual donors who support us, and we're always picking up more of them as much as we can. And
that's cool. I see you have a donate by PayPal.
We've got a donate by PayPal. It's really easy on our website.
Nice.
But that literally, I mean, keeps us going, and we're going to keep doing this. I started this organization in a prison yard.
Yeah.
And I actually made more money then than I do now. I was paid 12 cents an hour to work in the prison, but we've done so much with no money.
Uh-huh.
It's not easy, but really, and that should make people feel good as well. Giving is wonderful.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be afraid to do that, because the work it's good work. It's God's work, we like to say. And it's important work, and it's necessary.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things we do is sort of focus on health, and because in my mind, it's helped me a lot to sort of wake up and see how the world really works when you start improving your health. You start drinking your green juices, you start bringing those electrical foods in your body and all that stuff, and it really makes your brain work. And but there's other things that could do that as well. Like, we're all trying to get to this platform, this plateau of the type of people that are open and aware of these kinds of issues. And there's many different ways to get there, and health is a good way to get there. But also you can get there through reading your book, through turning off the TV and start reading books and start educating yourself and going to websites. YouTube, I call YouTube University. It's like, there's so many different ways for you to become more aware of what's really going on. And when people start doing that and start shutting off the TV, I think that things can change. I think people can start waking up.
When the real voice starts coming in.
Yeah, I think God bless the internet, because it's helping, progress all of these new ideas. I mean, 30 years ago, what Extreme Health Radio talks about, what you talk about, would probably be demonized. Would never have any sort of mainstream, but people listen and people care about what you do. It's such a cool time, because although people are very close-minded, and you have the last vestiges of the previous generation still holding on for dear life, you should hear the stories that we have from medical doctors getting their medical licenses taken away. And it's the same sort of issue. It's just, instead of law, it's medicine. And so that generation is slowly going away, and this new generation now of people that are awake, I think is an awesome thing.
God bless you in what you do. Seriously, Andrea. Like, when you reached out, you found us, and I thought, and you stuck out to me. There was something about, and I went to your website, and I go, yeah.
Well, you know what, too?
This woman is.
We learned about you a few days after we watched this documentary on Gaiam TV about this woman who's going into prison systems, teaching the young women in prison yoga.
Oh, wonderful.
And spiritual and meditation.
Yes.
And then not long after, about a week or so.
I think it was
the week
3 days.
Whatever it was, and then you contacted us. It was amazing.
I think that's beautiful. I think, those are the things that are spiritually healing. And you don't find them anywhere in a prison, meditation or yoga and all of those things that help you to reconnect with your spirit. And it's why prisons will never work. They just won't work. They're places that just bring you so far from that.
It's the total opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a total opposite.
Is there space I know as we're wrapping up, but is there space within within the prison system, incarcerated, we don't call them inmates, we call them people.
Incarcerated people.
Is there space for people who wake up and are in this process to kind of go inward and have those experiences while in that building? I mean, is there a time that people can get away and work on themselves in a quiet sort of setting, or is it just always like
so there's
almost
no
set up
privacy.
to fail you?
Right. So there's no privacy, but people do. We have phenomenal stories. In every prison, you can find that guy or that woman who is looked upon in the prison as a particularly spiritual, and I'm not speaking in religious sense of the word. I'm speaking in the sense of spirituality.
They look at him as a weirdo or something.
They found that inner peace. And so I would sit on my prison bunk, for instance, and I would meditate, but there would be all kinds of chaos going on around while you're doing that. That's why meditation is so absolutely critical in helping us to heal.
Better at those times too.
Because when you are able to engage in that and be able to find that inner peace no matter what's going on around you, it begins to help you to deflect a lot of those same triggers that cause people to become incarcerated again, or the
anger issues. That's because isn't that the whole goal? Everyone we talk to be able to meditate in the middle of an airport, or in the middle of a freeway, or in your quiet space. It doesn't matter, but that's when the real spirit connection. You could be sitting in a public place full of
running.
noise.
I mean, I ran. I found there was a track at the prison.
Awesome.
And I went from not running for court, running for court, or not to be late in front of the judge, which is the extent of what I would do to exercise, to running while I was there.
But it must have been therapeutic.
I did 5 miles a day because I wanted to stay out of that prison.
Wow.
And the track was an outdoor track, and I would run in a blizzard. I didn't care. And every day it just centered me, and
a chance to get out.
Right. So, you find ways to do that, and it would be really amazing if we could. There's so many other things we could do besides just locking people in cages.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people are headed. It does take more creativity, because how we change our language, it matters. It takes more creativity to say, how can we pool our resources and our creative minds together to help create a system where people aren't needing to take drugs or not desiring to take drugs. I mean, so I think it takes more creativity, but I think that's the generation that's coming up. I think
I really feel hopeful.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
Really feel hopeful for it.
Yeah, because where has the previous generations gotten us now? And it could be argued that we need a little bit of work on that, as evidenced by your whole career. So, what a lot of people don't know too is that prisons are privately funded, right?
Some of them are, yeah. But I mean, and people get kind of caught up on that whole prison industrial complex and the private system, but they could close every private prison today and we'd still have a huge mass incarceration problem.
There'd still be injustices.
Right. So the private industry exists, but if they close them all today, it wouldn't put a dent in our incarceration population. So, but yes, it's growing like everything else. A lot of the immigration detention facilities now are privately managed. So, it's sold, prisons are sold on the stock market now. I mean, these are just the atrocities. Yeah. How do you begin? That is bondage. That is, you're selling human bondage on the stock market.
Yeah.
So these companies that make prisons and manage prisons for people who are hugely profitable right now are traded on our stock market now. So that's frightening when you think about how you're going to create that shift. But if you create it, they'll figure out a way to monetize it.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, let's just create it and listen. Somebody will figure out how to make a nickel off of it.
Yeah, maybe just regulation or taxes, whatever. But some other form of system would be good.
Absolutely.
Amen. Wow.
Well, that was a fun show. Thanks for coming by.
You guys are amazing, and I want to say thank you. I mean, for me to stumble upon you guys all the way in the frozen tundra of Boston now, where we've been hit with 4 blizzards, and then to be able to come out here and
fun.
And to meet with you guys.
It's an honor.
Enjoy your sunshine. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm excited. So you're here on the West Coast for how much longer? And
I'm leaving on Friday.
What is it now? Tuesday or Wednesday?
Wednesday.
Yeah.
Okay. So you leave on Friday, and do you regularly do speeches and things if people want to?
Yes. So one of the ways that we sustain ourselves, thank you for asking, is I speak all over the country, and we receive a speaking fee for that. Oh. And so most of the time, I'm on the road about 200 days out of the year.
Whoa.
And I speak at all sorts of events and conferences and you name it, and help really to raise the level of awareness. A lot of people are interested in this issue now. They want to understand it better. The fact that we advocate unapologetically on behalf of women. and their children, incarcerated women and their children, resonates. It's more palatable to people sometime. But what we always say is, if you heal the family, starting with the woman, you've healed an entire community. So we come from that perspective. So a lot of women's organizations have been very interested, but I have been in front of Congress. I have spoken to different state legislators, all the way to conferences and and going into prisons as well. So
that's awesome. Wow. So you receive a fee, and so people can contact you if they're interested in having you speak at their organization or whatever.
And the best way to get in touch with you is email through your website?
The best way to get in touch is email. And our website is justiceashealing.org. And there's a button there to contact us, and it's great.
Well, we're really excited about the work you're doing. I think it's, we all have our different things that we do, but we're all striving to make the world a better place with more justice and more
healing,
more healing, more peace.
Healing is the name of the game on all levels, I think.
Yeah.
Because we all need healing.
Yeah.
We all need healing.
Thank you for coming by.
Oh, Andrea.
Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
It's an honor.
Thanks for your creativity and seeing how this is in relation to the work that you guys do.
Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah, this is awesome. All right, so check out her website, justiceashealing.com. Andrea James.
.org.
Oh, .org. Yeah, justice. I keep getting that right. So everything is .com, and so I think everything's .com.
And her book, you guys. I've just started it, and I'm going to be blowing through it this week because it's riveting from the very beginning.
Upper Bunkies Unite.
You got it.
Nice. Good stuff. All right, justiceashealing.org, and this is episode 365, and we're going to be on again tomorrow, right, Kate, with Mary?
Yes, Mary Atala.
Mary Atala. So
she'll be in
fun
studio
show
as well. It's a really fun week for that.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
Yeah.
So we will, we put, actually, Kate was nice enough to take notes of this whole entire episode.
I'm so nice.
And with the books that we mentioned and all that stuff. And
it's all there.
Andrea's book will be on there as well. So that'll be extremehealthradio.com/365. And if you guys would like to support the show, we didn't do any ads on this show on purpose because the flow was so fun, and we felt like it was just important to get the message out without interrupting anything. So if you would like to support the show, you can go to extremehealthradio.com/support. And that's a way for people to donate to us on a per podcast basis. So they can donate $1 per podcast, 50 cents a podcast. And so it's a really cool thing called Patreon that we just signed up for. So make sure to go to extremehealthradio.com/